Build your career with CMI confidence? It all starts with the tools at your fingertips. CMI creates workplaces full of inspiring leaders. With its on-demand resources, network of mentors and industry-leading accreditations. Search CMI Confidence today.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Conflict to Collaboration, Leading with Confidence in the Workplace digital event. My name is Natasha and I'm an Events Delivery Coordinator at CMI. Don't forget to join the conversation using the live chat box. Feel free to ask any questions you have for the speakers and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session. Our presenters are using Menti today. You can join them at menti.com using the code 56100930. We'll also pop that on screen for you. We have many interactive activities planned, so please participate in the polls throughout the event. I'll now hand over to Emma and Claire to begin today's event.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Natasha. Thank you for the introduction. And hi, Claire. Nice to see you.
Hi, Emma.
Yeah, all good? All grand for today?
Brilliant. Really excited.
Brilliant. Me too. So thanks, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. As Natasha has kindly introduced us, so conflict to collaboration, that's what we're here for. And we're here to help you to lead with confidence within your workplace. So as Natasha said, we're going to be using Menti. You can either go to menti.com or you can scan the QR code that I'm sharing on my screen just now. On my slides, always at the top of the slides, the code will be there throughout. And I know that CMI are going to be having it rolling across the ticker as well at the bottom of your screens. So please do join in. This is an interactive session and it's only going to work if you join us. Otherwise, Claire and I will be doing a lot of ad-libbing and filling in. So please do join us on Menti. If you haven't used Menti before, it's a piece of software that both Claire and I use in our teaching and learning and on our coaching sessions. It's also fully confidential, so any responses that you give are totally confidential. We don't see your name, and equally we don't hold on to that data afterwards. It gets cleared off the system. So please rest assured that if you do wish to join in, we'd really welcome you to, but again, it will remain confidential and certainly none of that information would be used by CMI. So let's have a bit of a look at what we're going to cover today. So we'll start off by doing some introductions in a minute or so. So Claire and I will introduce ourselves. We're then going to have a look at defining conflict in the workplace, so provide you with a framework of what those definitions look like. We'll have a talk about sort of understanding yourself and the importance of it, and we'll then roll that out to understanding other people. We're going to have a look at some theories today. So Claire's going to talk us through lots of theories around framing and naming the conflict. We'll then have a look at some case studies. We'll then also finally look at sort of thriving through conflict. So how can you thrive in an environment where there's lots of conflict? And we'll also get you to have a think about making a plan for what your next steps might be. So hopefully really interactive, and hopefully you'll all leave here with something really useful. So Claire, maybe you could start by introducing yourself.
Yeah, sure. So obviously my name is Dr. Clair Doloriert, as you can see on the screen in front of you, and I'm a senior lecturer at Bangor Business School here in Wales. And I'm fascinated and really interested in just studying human and social behaviour in work and organisations. And I think my role here today really is to provide you with just some theoretical insights in terms of how we can unpack conflict and kind of navigate our way through what is quite an emotional and complex challenge in the workplace.
Brilliant, thanks Claire, and it's great to be alongside you today in this session.
Yes.
So my name's Emma. I'm a professional development expert by trade at a company called Corndel, delivering leadership and management apprenticeships. But I also volunteer with CMI. I'm a chartered manager. I've been a chartered manager for nearly 10 years now, and I've volunteered with the Wales Regional Board for about the last 3 years as the events lead. I'm super passionate about leadership and management, both challenges and how I can help support people. And I'm an executive coach as well, so I look at things from a coaching perspective to try and really support people so that they can use their own resourcefulness to overcome challenges that they're facing in the workplace. So that's a little bit about me, and we're hopefully looking forward to supporting you with your challenges today. So let's come on to you, and I'd like you to go to your Menti devices now. So using your smartphone, having gone into menti.com, let's hear a little bit from you. So what's your understanding of conflict in the workplace? Let's hear from you. This is going to create a word cloud. Hopefully people will log on and
Fingers
join
crossed.
us. Yeah. Oh, messy.
Big one.
That is a big one. Absolutely. What else might we have? Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Absolutely spot on there. It is inevitable because we're all different, aren't we?
Yeah.
All different in the way that we work, which we'll explore a little bit later. What else might we have? Hopefully we've got more than 2 people joined us. It's going to be super quiet. Whoa, there we go. Yeah, disagreement, misunderstanding, argument, ego-driven, competing objectives, toxic,
There's some great
tension.
words here.
There's some cracking ones, aren't there? Yeah. I said, she said, yeah. Personality clashes. Power. Disagreement. Still really big there. Tension and stress is coming out as well, isn't it?
It's interesting that all of these words are quite negative, Emma.
They are, aren't they? They are.
Yeah.
They are quite negative. So we've not got anybody viewing it as amazing experience to be in that
No.
challenge, have we? Yeah. Oh, we have got a can be helpful. I can see that. It's getting ever so small. But there is a few there. Brilliant. We've got so many people responding. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah,
This is great.
brilliant.
And hopefully you can see by looking at all of these words that it's really difficult. And hopefully that's why you've joined us today, is to kind of get a bit of a mutual space around understanding that we're all in this together. We don't really, any of us, enjoy it, and it can be really hard and really challenging. It can be really easy to come across conflict as well. So brilliant. I'm going to move us on because we've got lots to cover today. So again, back on your Menti devices, what's the most common trigger for workplace conflict? What's that spark that happens that means we end up in conflict in the workplace? What's coming to mind for you? Again, sharing on our Menti devices. Brilliant. So clash of characters, emotion, yeah, miscommunication, absolutely spot on. Yeah. Sense of unfairness, yeah, different priorities. Ooh, empire builders. Oh. Sure, we've all known a few of those in our time.
There's a lot to unpack in that one, isn't there?
Gosh, there really is. Where do we even go? Different opinions, personality types, yeah. Lack of communication as well as miscommunication, so actually failing to communicate.
It's really interesting as well how you have some social aspects coming through here and other sort of more structural elements coming through.
Yeah. Professional disagreement. This is getting really small. I'm having to lean in. There's so many responses. What I should also say is that when we've made this amazing word cloud, we're going to be sending it to you afterwards. So although it's getting really small on our screens, we'll be able to send it to you, so you'll be able to unpick it afterwards.
And it might sound obvious, but the larger the words, the more responses that we've had under that theme. Is that right, Emma?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So misunderstanding and miscommunication, personalities, disagreements, poor communication, lack of communication, lack of understanding. Those are our big words there. Brilliant. Again, I'm going to move us on, but thank you so much for your participation. We'll come back to you a little bit later for some more. So Claire, tell us, what is conflict in the workplace?
Well, as we can see from the Menti word clouds that we've just all sort of engaged with, conflict is broad. It means different things to different people, and it can be major in the workplace, and it can involve sort of small, minor aspects of day-to-day work. But I think we can all agree it evokes emotion in us, which can be really challenging to navigate. And you know, it doesn't suggest necessarily that all conflict is bad. Conflict is inevitable, as we saw from the word cloud. It's part of the social aspect of work. And some conflict can lead to positive things like creativity, problem solving and innovation, which of course organisations really want to encourage within the workplace. So what we're going to do now is just explore an aspect of conflict. We know that conflict is dynamic, but it's a two-way interaction. It's not just about someone else. It's about you and someone else. Both parties influence its development and its resolution. So turning to theory a little bit can be helpful. It's a helpful starting point for understanding ourselves and how we are in a conflict situation, and our role in successfully resolving conflict as well. Things like our personality can influence our conflict style, our own self-awareness. It can shape our reactions and responses to others. Who we are can influence whether we're going for a win in a conflict situation, or whether we're sort of more inclined to work towards a compromise. And how we communicate with people can influence what outcome is produced at the end of conflict, and whether this is a productive or a destructive outcome as well. So over to you, Emma.
Yeah, thanks. So ahead of the workshop, we asked you to consider taking a personality insight test, and this link was sent to you by the events team in your email. Don't panic if you haven't done it. There's plenty of time, yeah? But the tool that we shared was one from the CMI Resource Centre, and it looks at the 5 overriding personality traits that we can see and measure in people. These types constitute one of the current and dominant theories concerning personality and behaviour. They're the most basic breakdown of personality traits and account for some of the differences that we see in people and between people. And obviously in the word cloud, you've already talked about difference, haven't you? You've talked about misunderstanding. There are no right or wrong personalities, just a fit or maybe a mismatch between people. And by taking the test, it will have allowed you to understand a little bit more about yourself. When we understand ourselves, it unlocks vital knowledge about your current style and what it means at work. In addition, it might help you to have a think about what you want out of life and work. Have a think about looking beyond that immediate environment or situation and explore greater opportunities. It can also help you plan changes in your life, and particularly in a changing world when you're in that scenario. It allows you to become a bit more self-sufficient at making job, life and career decisions. And it also can enable you to understand what types of role might suit your personality. So let's have a look at some results. The results of this test allow us to understand ourselves in a little bit more detail. So the table here I'm sharing shows you my results. Okay, I've been super brave today. So let's have a look at them, and let's have a think about them in a little bit more detail and relate them back to our topic. So these are the type of results that you'd see from undertaking that CMI test that we shared with you. So the first row, we've got extroversion, and as you can see here, I'm sort of sat just under the middle. So for me, it depends on the scenario. In a one-to-one setting, I can be quite extroverted. Big groups, I tend to be more reserved. If you give me a sense of purpose in the task, I'm away. If you leave me with ambiguity and uncertainty, you'll probably find me retreating a little bit. I like a plan. I like a good structure. So how might this play out with conflict in the workplace? If you've got people at different ends of the scale, they have the potential to clash and not understand each other. Introverts tend to prefer to avoid confrontation and take time to process their emotions, whilst extroverts are more likely to directly engage in discussions and seek to resolve issues through open communication. The next one down is agreeableness. So here I've scored in the middle. This means that I enjoy team working, but I will challenge others and I'll voice my views when I feel strongly about an issue. On less important issues, I may be willing to compromise and go along with the thoughts of others. And in this case, my boundaries and my values are really my driver. If something pushes up against either of those, I'm likely to provide a challenge. So have a think about your level of agreeableness. How might that compare with those that you might have conflict with? What compromises might you benefit in making? Next, we've got emotional stability, and here I score on the lower end. And for me, this manifests itself when I have short deadlines, unclear pathways, maybe competing tasks, and you might find that I spend time in the reaction state rather than the response mode. So how do you rate on this scale? How does that impact how you show up, especially in that conflict space? What might you look to do to manage your own emotional response in a conflict scenario? Then we've got conscientiousness, and here I've scored high, meaning that I'm organised, I'm efficient, I work at a steady, even pace, I'm a planner. I get a level of frustration when I work with others who don't operate in the same way. So how might this manifest itself in conflict? Might I become more resentful to others if I don't feel that they're pulling their weight on a joint task? This, combined with a low emotional stability, could create a conflict if I didn't have an awareness of myself. And finally, openness. My score here means that I prefer to follow tried and tested ways and that I feel more comfortable with the familiar. So imagine a scenario where somebody with my characteristics is being expected to take on newer technologies under short deadlines where the team aren't pulling their weight. Could be a recipe for conflict, right? Well, not necessarily. And we'll move on to explore some practical elements that can help each and every one of us, no matter our personality type, to try and overcome conflict. But before we do that, I'd really like to hear from you. For those that did get round to taking the personality test, or even those that didn't, maybe you could have a stab at which of the 5 areas might be an area that you need to focus your attention on. So again, back to your Menti devices. This is a drop a pin. So if you move your cursor, there we go. We've got some emotional stability. Brilliant. Let's have a look at what we've got in terms of responses. Again, it doesn't matter whether you've taken the test or not. If you have, you'll know which ones you need to focus on. If you haven't, I'm sure you can have a bit of a stab at it.
And there's no right or wrong with this, is there, Emma?
No, there isn't. We've all got to be brave and show our results and you know, work out where we work effectively and where we don't.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So we've got lots of dots on emotional stability.
Yeah.
Quite a few on
Yeah,
agreeableness and extroversion. Oops, just go back. Brilliant. So as you can see, we are pretty fairly spread there. And as Claire correctly said, there's no right or wrong here. But hopefully bringing a greater awareness to you and the areas that you maybe need to dial up and dial down in those scenarios can help you. That's what we're here to do today, is to try and bring that greater awareness. So Claire, let's move on. Over back to you.
Yeah, sure. So that was really interesting. And as I said earlier, understanding ourselves is important. It's an important first step in trying to sort of navigate our way through this and understanding conflict. However, it doesn't provide us with a complete picture. Conflict is a two-way dynamic process, as we know. Just as we need to understand our role in conflict, we also need to understand the other party or parties, the other person or people we're engaging with. But of course, people are different. And while diversity in work is a great thing, as it allows for creative and innovative thinking and problem solving, it does bring its challenges. It can be harder to work with people who think and behave and communicate differently. So understanding these differences can help us start to navigate our way through conflict more effectively. And it can help us sort of dig deep with empathy and trying to be open to finding our way to a common ground, and that sort of that point of compromise really with a conflict scenario. So as an academic, I love a good theory, but theories have their limitations, and they can only give us a sort of small bit of insight, a partial bit of insight into a complex issue, but they can be a helpful start. And conflict theories can be helpful in understanding how we manage conflict, how we respond in a conflict situation, and also help us towards working to resolve conflict. So Emma and I have identified, we've cherry-picked a few theories for today, that we can sort of introduce to you and that you can add to your conflict toolkit to help you be better with conflict and help you navigate and work your way through conflict in a more strategic way. Of course, there are more theories out there, and both Emma and myself will be happy to continue a conflict conversation beyond this workshop if any of you feel that this may be of help for you. So the first theory that I'd like to offer you is the diversity wheel, and this comes from intersectionality theory, and I think it acts as a great theoretical bridge between the you in a conflict situation, the I, and the other party. There are many versions of these, and we like this one. It helps us understand our own held power and privilege that we might draw on in a conflict scenario, but also understand the power and privilege that others hold or that they don't have access to. This version clearly shows power at the centre of the wheel, and this is where our privilege lies. So if you have characteristics or socio-economic elements that lean towards the centre, you have access to certain privileges. Privilege can create an imbalance of power where those with privilege, and especially if they're not conscious and aware of that privilege, they may feel more confident in asserting their views and more confident in a conflict interaction. Perhaps feeling more able to go for that win in a conflict scenario and less willing to compromise, whilst others with less privilege may be less willing to challenge, possibly less assertive. Those with less privilege may have to struggle more and face greater systemic barriers, and conflict can be harder with less privilege. So understanding your own privilege allows for you to become more self-aware and understanding others with potentially less privilege. And that can make you more empathetic in a conflict situation and even willing to be prepared to work towards compromise and to actively hear, to actively listen and work towards a more meaningful resolution. The next theory that we cherry-picked is the circle of conflict model. And this was developed by Christopher Moore. And it's essentially a framework for diagnosing and managing conflict by identifying its root causes. So essentially, this model helps you kind of name the conflict. It helps you put a name onto what you are dealing with, which I think is a really important starting point when you're trying to resolve a conflict situation. The model categorizes conflict into 5 distinct types. So first of all, we have relationship conflicts, which is quite an obvious one. These arise from interpersonal sort of social tensions, often due to negative emotions, personality clashes, or communication breakdowns. The second one is data conflicts, and this occurs when there's a lack of accurate information or perhaps a misinterpretation of information between two parties or a disagreement over kind of the facts of the situation. Then we have interest conflicts, and these emerge from competing interests. It's the kind of what's in it for me or what's in it for my team. And this can create a sense of kind of competition among individuals or groups. Then we have structural conflicts, and this is a more of a sort of an external source of conflict. And this is about the organization itself and structural and governance factors of the organization that can really kind of exacerbate, add fuel to the fire of a conflict situation. And this could be something like a company's hierarchical structure or having limited resources, scarce resources, limited budgets or something like that, that could lead to silo working or kind of competition in teams that are vying for access to certain budgets. And then the final one, and this is possibly the most challenging, this is value conflicts. And value conflicts arise when there are fundamental differences in our values, our beliefs, and our worldviews. And these conflicts can be particularly challenging to resolve because values are something that are held deeply within us and are much less flexible. So this is a really useful model to help us kind of just identify what type of conflict am I dealing with here? What is the source of the conflict in this situation? So then this is arguably one of my favourite models, although I possibly say that about every theory. This is Thomas and Kilman's conflict handling style. And it assesses 5 styles of conflict along 2 axes. So we have assertiveness and we have cooperativeness. So it helps us recognise how we typically respond to and behave in a conflict situation, and also how others may be responding and behaving. So assertiveness in this model is the extent to which a person tries to satisfy their own concerns. So highly assertive is high energy. It can be aggressive, but it can also be more positive as well. Cooperativeness is the extent to which a person tries to satisfy the concerns of others. So you can see how competing, which is high assertiveness and low cooperativeness, is a style with a strong focus on achieving one's own goals at the expense of others. On the other hand, collaborating, which is high assertiveness and high cooperativeness, is characterised by an effort to satisfy both parties' concerns and achieve a win-win solution. It involves open communication, mutual problem solving, and a really sort of a cooperative mindset. So a frequent position people find themselves in is that of compromising. So this is moderate assertiveness and moderate cooperativeness. This style involves finding a middle ground where both parties make concessions. You give up something, essentially, to reach a mutually acceptable solution. It's less focused on maximising outcomes for both parties, but it aims for a fair resolution that partially satisfies each side. And of course, if we link this back to the power privilege model, we can see why some people may have a default position based on their confidence due to the privileges that they are blessed with, or the systemic and social barriers that they've had to endure, and they might sort of adopt more of an avoidance kind of stance with their conflict handling style. So the next theory is Glassell's 1999 win-lose theory, and I know Emma really likes this theory. And it describes how conflict can escalate in intensity, how you can add fuel to the fire, often resulting in destructive outcomes. So this is a great model, which when used with the circle of conflict model, which is the name, the source of conflict, and your conflict handling style. So what is my conflict handling style? It helps you identify essentially where you're at with the current conflict situation. So the goal is to use this understanding to recognise where you're at and then intervene as early as you can and de-escalate tensions before the conflict becomes unmanageable. The key takeaways from this model is that early intervention is crucial. Conflict is much easier to resolve in the early stages before it escalates. However, when it does start to escalate, this can be because of the emotional side of conflict. And I said to you earlier that, conflict is an emotional experience. However, as conflict deepens, emotions take over and rational solutions become harder. So have a think about, if you're going through a conflict situation at the moment, where are you at? And how might you think about your conflict handling style and how you might adapt what is possibly your kind of default conflict handling style in order to help with de-escalation? How might you set out to do this and step outside of the emotional side of conflict in a conflict situation to think about it more rationally to try and de-escalate what is going on? So this theory is called the interest-based relational, so the IBR approach. And this actually can help us find our way through conflict and help us de-escalate conflict in a way, because it helps us remove that emotion from the conflict scenario. It sets out a tried and tested formula that helps us de-escalate, and it aims to preserve relationships whilst addressing the underlying causes of conflict. So it's particularly useful in the workplace and in resolving interpersonal disputes where maintaining positive relationships is important, because it focuses on interests rather than positions, and it can be applied to various business settings, making it a versatile conflict resolution tool. It's great in that you can integrate the other models you're working your way through into this tool as well. So the first kind of stage with the IBR approach is that you set the ground rules. You establish a climate of respect and openness, and the goal is to create an environment conducive to a productive conversation. You then separate people from the problem. So it's a core tenet of the IBR approach. You distinguish between the people involved in the conflict and the issue at hand. And the idea is to prevent personal attacks or emotions from clouding the resolution process. Instead of blaming or criticising, focus on solving the problem at hand. So then you move on to focusing on interests, not positions. Positions are what people say they want, but interests are the underlying needs, desires, and concerns and motivations that drive these positions. In a conflict, each party usually has several interests that might overlap. By uncovering these interests, the parties can create solutions that address everyone's needs. After identifying the interests, the next step is to generate options to the conflict through collaborative brainstorming to resolve the conflict. This stage encourages creativity and a focus on mutual benefit where both sides can gain something. The goal here is to avoid a zero-sum outcome where one party wins and the other party loses, and instead explore win-win solutions. So the final stage is reach a consensus, and this consensus should satisfy the interests of both parties. This agreement should be clear, actionable, and fair, ensuring that both sides are willing to commit to it. So, how does this work in reality? Let's turn to Emma, who will share with us a case study.
Brilliant. Thank you for those. Really relevant and really helpful to kind of frame where we are. I know we've given you a lot of frameworks there, but we're now going to turn that, as Claire said, into reality. So I'm going to share a case study with you. Great. So Mark, could you give us an example?
Yes, sure. Yes, hi, I'm Mark. So I lead major change programs and transformations within a large financial services organisation. The situation I had was that there was a request from a business owner to move key resource from one of the deliveries that I'm managing to another delivery that I'm managing at very short notice. I guess the task was to understand if this request could be achieved without impacting the overall delivery. The action I took was to work through the impacts to see if the move was possible at this time. And the result was that I was able to move the resource over a couple of weeks later without impacting the overall delivery. Some things didn't go quite well as I'd hoped. So essentially, this is not the first time the person had raised such a request, given the priority of delivery that they are sponsoring. My immediate reaction was that I felt I was being told rather than consulted to move the resource. And this was a result of them failing to manage expectations and plan fully. I was relatively short with the individual. So what would I do next time if this happened again? Next time I would pause and consider before responding. I would acknowledge their request and outline what I was going to do to establish their request could be supported. I'd give a timeline for when I would have an outcome to discuss with them.
Brilliant. So there we've heard from Mark. So let me summarise some of those key learnings that Mark shared with us in that video. So I think the first thing is that he established the root cause of the conflict. And it wasn't the first time that the requester had raised such a request, so there was underlying history there. He then went on to say that he felt like he was being told rather than consulted. So that's around the approach and the manner of the request. And this was as a result of the requester failing to plan and manage expectations. So in thinking about the root cause model, this interaction might well have tipped into data conflict, relation conflict, possibly values and structural conflict areas. So lots of triggers there. Mark also gave us insight about how he reacted in this scenario. He was relatively short with the individual. The request had created a reaction in him rather than a response. And if Mark didn't have this level of self-awareness, one can see how this could have potentially escalated quite quickly. So with Mark taking time to reflect on what had happened here and what he would do differently, he's given us an insight on how he effectively managed the conflict by using parts of the Thomas Kilmann model that Claire shared us. He's compromised, he's taken a collaborative approach, and he's used his excellent planning and communication skills to reach a successful outcome. So we'll now take a look to bring these themes and learning together to answer some of the pre-submitted questions. In preparation for the workshop, we invited you to pre-submit questions, and we were absolutely blown away by the questions, the quantity and quality of questions. Okay, Claire and I have spent time going back into trying to look at how we categorize them, and really trying to work out how we go about answering as many of these as we can. Obviously, there's some that we will answer shortly, but really generic themes. So what we did was we've drawn out 3 kind of underlying themes of those questions. So we had conflict with line managers or people with hierarchical power. We're sort of thinking about that in the same sphere. We then had conflict within teams, and that could either be teams that you're managing or maybe teams that you're part of, so like a senior leadership team. And then we had a third around building self-confidence with managing conflict. So now let's bring these themes together. So how to cope and thrive in these scenarios. And here's some practical tips to bring some solutions to life for you for these 3 scenarios. So let's take handling conflict with line managers first. Here I would talk about sort of using honesty and kindness. So naming it, calling out what's happening. This aligns with the circle of conflict model, and we'd use it to define what you're experiencing, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, how it's impacting you as an individual. I would get you to consider to provide some feedback using Kim Scott's radical candid feedback model, where you're caring personally, but you're challenging directly. Okay, so we're not beating around the bush here, we are being direct, but we are delivering that with a caring message. How about putting yourself in the other person's shoes? So consider the other person's viewpoint. Where might they be coming from? What constraints might they be working under? Or what might you not be aware of that maybe they're working under? Remember that we all turn up to work to do our best. Brené Brown talks about this in her podcasts. None of us turn up to do our worst. So what might be going on for them? Have a think about when you have worked well with this individual, what worked for you? What was it that you were doing in that moment that worked really well? And how might you then spin that out into this scenario where it's maybe not working so well? What principles might you use this time in order to help you? Who else has worked with and had conflict with this individual, and how did they overcome it? And then looking at Glassell's theory, thinking about a win-win. What does it look like for you? What does it look like for them? Where might you need to go in that grey area? What compromises might you need to make? So then let's think about handling conflict within teams. So it can be really helpful to begin with identifying that type of conflict. Again, using Christopher Moore's circle of conflict, which Claire's shared with us. What's exactly going on here? This will then allow you to understand kind of the helpful steps that might help you to overcome that conflict. And in order to do that, you're really going to need to create an environment for an effective discussion, one that has really high psychological safety for everybody. Then you're thinking about those personality types. What works for you? What works for the individuals that you're having the conflict with? Thinking about utilizing emotional intelligence. How do you go about understanding and collaborating on that greater goal? We're all here for a greater goal, whether it's an organization, a team. Claire and I are here for CMI's greater goal, but what are we actually here for? And how can we help work towards that greater goal rather than our goal that our egos have? How can you look there? How can you look to get there together? What's going to stop you and other individuals from getting to that greater goal? And what are you going to do in order to overcome that? Again, thinking about the Thomas Kilmann model, how might you respond in the conflict? How might the others respond in the conflict? If you think about transactional theory, so staying in adult state of mind rather than parent or child? How can you keep the other individuals in that adult state of mind? So it's two adults having a conversation rather than going into a more telling or a more childlike state. And if you do end up descending to that, making sure that there's breaks, there's cool off periods, you regroup and you move forward. So finally, building self-confidence with conflict. So here we're not suggesting bulldozing your way through, and maybe if you are the bulldozer, you might have some work to do, right? But I would say know that you're not alone here. Many of us are fearful of calling it out or having a difficult conversation or getting it wrong. Yeah, but we're all here to practice it. Don't let those fears hold you back from thinking, planning, and handling conflict with confidence. So again, have a think about what strategies have you used previously that worked. Consider that personality type. What areas might you need to work on in order to get the best out of the situation? What might your priority be? If you've got lots of areas that you need to work on, that's okay. We all have, yeah? But which is the one that's going to trip you up the most in this particular scenario, and how might you go about adjusting that? I also think that sometimes zooming out, so is this going to matter in a year? Will I still be concerned about this? Or what might my friend say to me if I was explaining this as I was having a walk or having a pint or whatever it happens to be? Again, it allows you to put that perspective in. Have a look at others. What do they do in this space? What might work for you that works for them? Another final model that's really helpful is the David Rock scarf model. You might want to have a look at that and have a look at which 2 or 3 elements are maybe causing that threat to you, and how might you go about turning that threat into an empowerment case. I'd also encourage you to reflect, a bit like we saw Mark do. So what didn't work? I can guarantee it won't go right all the time because you're human, just like Claire and I. Okay, so what didn't go so well? What might you do differently next time? How might you get a better scenario? So I'm going to bring it back to you now. Claire and I have covered an awful lot of details with you today. We've shared models, we've shared case studies, we've shared some practical tips. So from what we've covered today, what might your next steps be to manage conflict with a better outcome? I love it. Be the adult. Brilliant. Fast off the mark, that person.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else might we see? This is our last mentee. Brilliant. So, don't resign. Don't do that. Go and talk to somebody first. Take the time to be calm and to think. Remove the emotion. Brilliant. That's a good level of self-awareness.
Possibly one of the hardest things to do, and I think this is where theories can really help, because they just encourage you to take a step back from the emotion. And obviously we haven't gone into lots of detail with these theories and haven't covered all the theories today, but they are just a good starting point in just getting a hold on that emotion and kind of looking a bit beyond it.
We've got loads of things coming in here. I'm just scrolling through them. So there's quite a lot about emotion, and there's a lot about taking time. There's a lot about implementing what they've learned today, which is great. Adult has come up quite a bit. I'm glad you like the models. You're welcome. Considering, that's a brilliant one. Thinking about the other side of the coin. Removing emotion. What does win-win look like? Lovely. So you've all got some homework to do. So let me just recap on what we've covered so far. So we've gone about defining conflict in the workplace, and Claire gave you some great definitions there. We've started to unpack looking at ourselves through the personality test that I shared with you, and you thought about which of those 5 areas are really important for you as an individual to focus on. We've looked at how we can impact others with our personality and the way that we turn up. Claire's given us brilliant frameworks, models that we can understand both the conflict, how it manifests, how we deal with it, what outcomes we might want to get from a conflict. And we've explored theories and reviewed those models. We then brought it into the real world. We've had a look at a case study of Mark, and he's talked to you about how he dealt with a conflict and what he would do differently. And then we've brought it back into the scenarios that you've kindly shared with us through your questions ahead of time. And hopefully, on your last slide, you've had a go at thinking about what you might do differently. So you've made a bit of a plan. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come to some audience questions. So the first one that we had was from Mariam, which was around how to mediate a conflict. We were asked to share some tips. So the first thing I would say is have a think about setting the stage. Yeah, so choosing a neutral location, establishing those ground rules, so respect, no interruptions, psychological safety, etc. Make sure that both parties are really willing to engage in dialogue, because if you've got a blocker on either side or any side, you're really going to get stuck. Listen to both sides or all sides, yeah, so allow each person to share their perspective without interruptions. Use that active listening, summarize their points to show that you've understood as the mediator. Asking open-ended questions. I've asked a lot of open-ended questions of you today to get you to think, so have a think about what questions you might want to ask. Then I'd look at trying to identify the root cause, so look beyond the surface issues to really try and find out what is exactly going on here, and encourage both parties to express their needs, their emotions, their feelings. Find that common ground where you can. Oh, it looks like my camera's gone off. Hopefully you can still hear me. I don't know what happened there. I didn't press anything. I was nowhere near the button. Anyway, I'm back. So yeah, encourage both parties to really turn up, to show up, to express their needs and emotion. Find that common ground where possible. Explore solutions together. Yeah, so ask both parties, what does a solution look like to them? And then try and facilitate to get a mutually beneficial outcome. Try and explore things that are realistic and fair for both parties, and then agree on a resolution. Do that summary, that recap, clarify if need be. I'd probably set some sort of SMART type goal around that, so everybody knows what they're looking to achieve. And then follow up, so important as well. Yeah, so check in with them sometime after this has hopefully been resolved. Yeah, what worked, what didn't work, what might you do differently next time? That's the sort of framework that I'd probably use. Anything else that you'd add, Claire?
No, I just think, you can dip in and out of some of the theories that I presented, and obviously there are more. And I think each has a role to play here. The interest-based relational approach can give you that framework for mediation. It can help you bring parties together and help you set the ground rules. And I think just being able to identify and almost map, who have I got in the room? What can you, based on evidence, identify is A's conflict handling style and who is B, and sort of think about the framework and how can I bring them together to that compromise place on that framework that we looked at. So I think, each of the tools is really relevant here, and just even understanding people's power bases and privilege, why somebody might feel that they are right in a conflict situation and that there is no other way and there is no better way. Do they have access and the benefits of certain privileges that give them that confidence? And that might just help you facilitate, mediate in a more empathetic and also sort of systematic way as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So we had another pre-submitted one by Barbara. So this was, how can leaders effectively balance addressing conflicts in the workplace with maintaining team morale?
It's an interesting one.
It is a really interesting one.
Yeah.
And loads of things came to mind here. So I'll share. Shall I go first, Claire?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So some things that came to my mind was really about prompt action. Yeah. Dealing with it quickly, but also thoughtfully. So there's a real balance here. Don't avoid conflict. Don't allow it to fester. Don't allow it to be unresolved. Try to handle things privately first, unless it's a team-wide concern. And as a leader, we'd obviously be wanting you to stay neutral and to be fair, to prevent any discrimination or any perceptions of favouritism. Psychological safety, a term that I've used a couple of times now. So really making sure that you're creating that environment where people are open, they're able to talk open and honestly, to show that differences, opinions are absolutely okay. Yeah, conflict can be positive, right? Because it can allow us to generate ideas. So it's about ensuring that that we normalize those differences, and that we create a productive space really for people, making sure that people feel heard. So then it's around that sort of Venn diagram around, how do you focus on the solutions? Yeah, what's the outcome that we want to sort of generate here? What space can we overlap in? That we don't create a blame culture, that we create something that's kind of entrepreneurial, forward focusing, solution driven, trying to get people to work together. Okay, so they might have had a conflict in this scenario, but how do we move forward from it? And trying to use it almost as a learning opportunity. So what didn't work in this scenario? How did we get to this scenario? What might we do differently to be more collaborative next time? Yeah, which the title of this is Conflict to Collaboration. So how do we get from A to B? And then I think about, thinking about the sort of team morale. It's around being a positive leader, being seen to be acting with kindness, with care, with proactivity, holding people to account, and kind of, developing the team, and kind of keeping those regular check-ins and maintaining that safety there. And then looking at how you integrate people back into the team. So, how do we collaborate after this event almost? And what else might you add, Claire?
I think you've sort of unpacked the leadership angle in sort of the last few things that you said, and I think just reflecting on who am I as a leader, and that's another workshop entirely. But are you more of a servant leader in your approach? There are certain leadership styles that are more conducive and supportive for when negotiating through conflict, and in maintaining team morale. And I know sort of servant leadership was identified as a really sort of supportive leadership style during the pandemic, when everybody was stuck online, and it was sort of very effective in terms of keeping teams that were working from home and very stressed engaged. So, I think, one of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle there is also to look at your own leadership style, and do I need to kind of move from being quite authoritative or transactional and adapt that slightly to support being more authentic, more honest, more open, more vulnerable even. There's nothing wrong with demonstrating and showing vulnerability as a leader. And so, that would be also a good place to sort of start, look inside and see how you are.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to take some of the live questions now. So we've got one from Mr. Keith Plowman. So is conflict always bad? Surely a difference of opinions forces an argument or narrative to be challenged and or justified, not saying it's always good or bad. This question came quite early, actually, about sort of 10-15 minutes in, and I suspect it was maybe in response to some of the word clouds that we were generating, where a lot of those words were negative. So it's a great question, Keith. And I would agree with you. No, it's not always bad. Yeah. And conflict allows ideas to be generated. Absolutely. It allows, that sort of wheat from the chaff, things to be discarded that, maybe aren't a good idea. It allows things to be challenged. I would say that there's almost that scale of escalation, isn't there? Yeah. And I think that it's also around understanding that some people might find conflict really challenging depending on their personality type. So thinking about your audience, and in terms of how you're responding and reacting to that audience. So I don't think it's a black and white, it's good or it's bad. There are lots of shades of grey with this, but that would be my thoughts. What about you, Claire?
Yeah, well, there's been some research that has sort of explored conflict and performance. and they call it an inverted U, which is essentially an N. And I don't know why they call it an inverted U.
Academics, eh?
But essentially, you sort of have performance on the vertical axis and conflict. So as conflict increases, performance can increase, but then you get to a tipping point and conflict continues to increase and then performance declines. So you've got like a nice little sort of Goldilocks zone with conflicts, where a little bit of conflict, a bit like stress, is quite, it's a bit of a call to action. It energizes you, it keeps you focused, it keeps that creativity. But then you get to a certain point and it tips off and it all goes wrong. So, and I guess the $1 million question is where is that tipping point, So you certainly don't want to eradicate all conflict from organizations. That would stifle creativity, innovation, and everything that we've been talking about today. So, I mean, it's a great question.
Yeah, it is. It is a great question. Brilliant, thank you for that one. So next one, Tracy Jones. So tips for an empath to control emotions when up against an aggressor.
Ooh.
Now this one really piqued my interest, partly because of the use of language, up against an aggressor. I was like, oh yes, that really kind of, the language used in that question is so black and white. So I guess through our conversation today, we've talked about lots of things that hopefully will give you some tips, lots of models that you can consider as well. But remember, conflict can be hard for most people. You just talked about that inverted model there, where there's a sweet spot for people. So, and again, that will be very much personality dependent. So if I was thinking of tips, I guess I'm a big proponent of mindfulness and kind of that mindful breathing. So trying to get in your body, out of your head, where all of these things are going, and into sort of where you're sitting, your feet on the ground, and trying to stay in that sort of emotionally positive space. Monitoring your breathing, really being in touch with your body. Your body acts as an early warning system. So there'll be something that happens, maybe your tummy flips over, your chest goes tight or something. So really thinking about, what's happening in my body, and then what can I do that can help me when you're in that scenario. It could be the breathing. Writing things down can help as well. There's a whole load of different ideas. What else would you suggest, Claire?
I mean, just to say, it's a very it evokes a very strong visual image, doesn't it? This tips for an empath to control emotions when up against an aggressor. Sort of imagining, somebody that's very hostile shouting in somebody's face, and it's quite triggering. So, conflict can be quite triggering for some people, particularly if you've had past experiences, and it might just bring everything back up. And I think self-awareness and awareness of your triggers is hugely important here. I think I do kind of lean on a transactional analysis quite a lot when I'm struggling with a triggering situation. And you can just Google it. We haven't introduced it today, unfortunately. We just didn't have enough time. But it's about the sort of the mode that you stay in and the mode that you can switch to when you're engaging in interaction with somebody. So if somebody is sort of shouting at you, they're taking on quite a hostile parent mode. And we can respond to that by sort of becoming a child and responding like a child. Or we can be conscious of how we respond and try and keep firmly within an adult response. And it's really interesting, and I think it's just such a useful framework for social engagements, even dealing with family members, not just workplace conflict. I think that would be a good starting point here. And it helps with the emotional intelligence, doesn't it, with the situation?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. I think sometimes, thinking about what you need to do to stay in that adult state of mind, you'll know yourself that there are people that you interact with that are always going to trigger you. and that are always going to have that impact on you, either their presence in the room sometimes, or the virtual meeting, or when they open their mouth, you think, oh, here we go. Yeah, and we all have that. That's again, that's part of being human. So it's good to be able to verbalize that and normalize it. So
have you heard of the broken record approach? I think it is, or it's called the stuck record approach. That can be really useful here, and it's just where you calmly repeat your point. So if you're up against somebody and they're being quite aggressive and sort of verbally hostile, and they're not listening to you, you just gently but firmly repeat your point until you get heard. And I think it's the stuck record approach. Really useful, and it gives you time to think about your next steps as well, but you just calmly repeat what you're saying until you are heard.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. So I'm just conscious of time, and we've reached 2 o'clock. I don't know how the time has gone so fast. So I'm going to hand back to Natasha. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful session. Lots of comments, lots of engagement. So that is it for today's session. So thank you to Emma and Claire for your insights and expertise. It's been wonderful listening to you. Stay tuned to hear more about CMI membership, and thank you for joining us.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.